Hello. Hi, everybody. Hope you had a good night's rest. We should have started earlier, but can you hear me? Hello. Good morning. I hope you had a good night's rest. But let's settle down since we should have started about an hour ago, but we also understood that, people traveled and got here yesterday and came straight into the meeting and therefore needed to have some rest. So we've kind of delayed the start of today's plenary session literally for about an hour, but time is going and we need to get into it. We have, for this session, we have, I think, 4 people to lead a conversation. Yesterday, we started in the afternoon, and then there were lots of people to listen to. So we didn't have much of an audience participation. And I'm not a fan of, bringing people together only for them to be talked to. I'm interested in having conversations. So today, let's try and create room for conversations. Also, the workshops will start immediately after this plenary session. And this is really, the workshops have been framed in such a way that, the participants would also have a fair opportunity to interrogate whatever the lead discussants, are saying, and even the way this particular Aepppradif has been designed. There's an opportunity to interrogate that critically and, share various perspectives. But yeah, we want to come to some definite practical things for us to do, since we don't want to have a talking shop, So I will go straight into inviting Eve Thibault to start. Eve is from the United Kingdom, works with the Voice of the Voiceless in Yorkshire, but also with the People's Internationalist Forum for Intercommunity Lifelong Learning. She has a particular perspective on bringing decolonization into migrant, politics. So Eve, over to you.
Is that, yeah? Okay. Thank you, Kofi. So my name is Eve Thibault, and I'm a member of VIDI, which stands for Voice of Voiceless Immigration Detainees Yorkshire. Yorkshire is a part of the northwest of England, and we are jointly working with PIFACOL, the People's Internationalist Forum for Intercommunity Lifelong Learning, as Kofi said. What I'm going to talk to you guys today about is the context of the UK immigration system and migrant justice, and how migrant justice is reparative justice. And it is to talk about the way that imperialism has been institutionalized in the way that we manage our borders as a violent space for people to be excluded, and continuing that colonization. VIDI challenges the current colonial system that maintains global North countries' dominance of the world order through international institutions, through ruling bodies, through nation states against Southern countries, global South countries as they are so called. And we view migration as the ultimate form of resistance to imperialism, as it is declaring independence and going against the structures that have been imposed on people from southern countries, from post-colonial states. It is not a problem to be controlled migration or to be managed, and it is a system that we currently use to sort people, to privilege people, to have certain rights, and to create different types of citizenship. Citizenship is inherently racist. It is basing people's value off their heritage, off where they've come from, and privileging certain people in that way. And we need to overcome this migration, the problems and the way that it's managed to revolt against colonialism. As in we do not challenge this as part of reparative justice, then it will continue because of the way that people's bodies are managed in this world. And I just want to differentiate as well, like the language that I use. If it's using they and stuff like that, it's just for purely explanatory reasons, not to diminish anybody in any way. So as Vidi, as we said, so we view migration as the ultimate form of resistance, and we advocate for interrogation of language specifically, specifically the use of the word refugee, asylum seeker, economic migrant, and we instead advocate for the term freedom seeker. The words and labels that we use to describe people who have migrated is dehumanizing. It decontextualizes the violence, the reasons that people have migrated in the first place, and hides the power structures that historical and currently continue to reinforce colonialism, imperialism, and oppression. The norms of international law for migrating were established by Western countries after World War II in the idea of preventing genocide and atrocities of happening. We can see that this is clearly a hypocritical double standard that allows Western perpetrators of violence and crimes to hide what is really going on in the world and their role that they play in creating violence and instability in southern countries. It allows them to get away with the crimes that they are committing. And even going back to the idea of claiming refugee status and seeking sanctuary somewhere, enshrined in the Geneva Convention in 1951, for 15 years, that held a territorial application clause, which basically meant that you could only be a refugee if you were from a European country. So in European law, it is that, in international law rather, it is embedded that there is a certain value to people who are white, and people who are not white have less value, less rights, and do not have that right to seek safety in other countries. The law also conceptualized violence as exceptional, individual, which places the burden of proof on people who have moved to prove the violence that they have suffered, and this at the same time eschews and hides the actual reason that people have moved, the violence of the states that have created that in their own countries from colonialism. It continues to manipulate the perception of the majority of people. As a British person, I grew up in the education system that didn't talk about colonialism. It is actively said that we shouldn't question our past, that we shouldn't reflect on it, which is a bit of contrast to sort of what was talked about yesterday in Germany, sort of looking to reflect a little bit. It's the bare minimum, but actively in the UK, it's a view that we shouldn't even look to our past. This law to claim refugee status has been used to give certain rights to Western countries, and at the same time is not applied to those countries. They can use sovereignty and their borders to trump the right of allowing people into their countries. The UK's system of claiming refugee status means that you have to claim it on UK soil. And since the 2023 illegal immigration bill that was passed means that if you have traveled through insecure or illegal means, you cannot claim asylum anymore. So this is fundamentally against the international laws that the so-called Western states made as the pinnacle of governing. This restriction on basic freedoms, on rights, it controls the narrative that we view migration in, and it removes the histories that are so deeply embedded within people moving. And the stripping of citizenship is something that is seen as, terrible, as violent. It's something when the Nazis did that for Jewish people, we vowed to never do this again. However, when the UK does it, we are seeing no problem. This is the current proposition of the new UK government to do this to people who are claiming refugee status, to never be able to access citizenship and entitlement to move and to be and settle in a new country. And also with the word freedom seeker, what we do is in empowering people and showing their resistance against colonialism. Rather than the word asylum seeker, it places it eschews what has gone on for the reasons for people moving, and it hides the fact that the states that people are moving to, like the UK, are extremely violent for those who come. They are met with the border regime at home. And this continues to discriminate and abuse people who are moving to seek sanctuary from countries that have been systematically depleted and destroyed by Western countries. It dehumanizes people and it reinforces this power hierarchy and the bias that we see. So in VIDI, we really advocate for interrogating the language that we use. Even in our own name, we are considering changing because we use the word detainees, and detainee defines someone as someone who has been in detention rather than being a person who has been detained. It labels them in this way, and we are constantly trying to reflect on our own language and complicity imperialism because of the way it's been normalized and you're not even aware of it. I just want to thank everyone today for being here and the amazing work that has gone into this conversation and learning that we are doing, and to elevate voices and experiences that are challenging colonialism today. I stand in solidarity with people who have been prevented from coming here, and I think, as people have said, it really highlights the fact that we are living in that colonial system where if you're from a country that was colonized, then you do not have the same rights to move. I'm extremely privileged to be here today as well as a British citizen, that I had no restrictions on my travel. And VIDI is an organization that is grassroots led by people with lived experience. And I'm the only person in that organization that doesn't have lived experience of migration. And this meant that for some people in the organization, coming here today was never, ever a possibility because of the restrictions on their visas, on their right to move. They are imprisoned in the UK and not able to access basic services. Our chair, Booker Coffey, he was destitute for 17 years whilst he awaited his status. So he was not allowed in the system of the UK's migration. You're not allowed to access welfare services. You cannot work. You are reliant on a £50 payment per week from the government to live off. And we all know that that is nowhere near enough. This is a stark contrast to my experience. I'm half Irish and a little bit French. And my grandparents, they moved to the UK for work because of the colonization that happened in Ireland by the British. And it's not to diminish the discrimination that they faced when they came. The signs in shops and pubs were no Irish, no blacks, no dogs. And there was a lot of discrimination against Irish people. However, in the bureaucracy and the legality of citizenship, Irish people are made the equivalent to British people. So my grandparents could work, they could access welfare, they weren't imposed. And this ultimately is because they were white. This is the only difference. This is because of the country that they came from and where they were colonized. The use of indigenous languages in Ireland as well has been completely wiped out by colonialism. And it was only last week that the north of Ireland, that is still run by the British colonial rule, they were allowed to speak their indigenous language, Gaelic, in court. That was illegal until this week only. So it still is impacting, but the privileges are really, really apparent. And I am here in that privileged position because of the color of my skin. It is inherently racist to distinguish people from their heritage and allow them to have certain rights in a country that they have come to. It's designed to control people, to diminish the appearance of non-white people in Western countries. The system of passports, of visas, of moving and restrictions has only been increasingly institutionalized since World War II. I will focus here on the UK system, and this is all a way of the colonialism that we still see and live with today in the way that our migration system is managed. In 1948, there was an act that allowed people from all colonies to come to the UK to access citizenship and work, and that was purely to fill the labour shortages in the UK at the time. After this, in 1962, they ended this right, and in 68, they limited the right to citizenship for people who have a British grandfather or father, this immediately favored white colonial countries because they were able to come to the UK much easier before. And it meant that Black people and people from those post-colonial states were extremely limited. And it really institutionalized that link between race, citizenship, and the freedom of movement. And even today, with Brexit happening and European citizens in the UK being denied, the certain rights, they still have such privilege within the system compared to people who are not white. We know that this is the color of people's skin that impacts it. We know it's the countries, the heritage, their religion, and where they have come from that makes people subject to these rules. And rules that are supposedly in a democratic country, I don't think anything could be described as democratic for what the UK does to people who are from a different background. And this is neocolonialism, it's hidden, and it's not that hidden really, unless you look a little bit further. But unfortunately, in the way our media manipulates us and the government manipulates us, that people do not question it. They do not see the impact of what has come before and the way that that is still maintaining the system that we have today. The people that are scapegoated are blamed. It is the complete divide and rule, the tactic that colonial states have used for centuries. They have perfected it. They blame people who are a minority for the problems that a few have created. And it is about abusing people and exploiting people. And we want to, question that these systems have existed in the first place. Freedom seekers, when they come to the UK, as I said, cannot access welfare, they cannot work, and are forced into an accommodation from the government that is private or very, very poor standard. They have complete curtailment on their freedom. And we are protesting, obviously, against this, but it is a very, very difficult challenge with this growth of fascism. And unfortunately, in the UK now, the left-wing party, you can't call it left-wing, the Labour government, the second biggest force, or even technically bigger now, is the fascist party, is Reform UK, and they are advocating for complete fascist policies. And this irony and scapegoating and people being unable to see what is happening really came to me in last year and last summer. And this was in the race riots that happened, and I don't know what was shown in outside of the UK, but basically there was a murder of young children by a Black man, and basically the fascists used this to attack places housing asylum seekers, to attack people of color, anyone that looked non-white. And when you are a freedom seeker, when you're waiting for your decision, you're kept in certain types of accommodation. And this was a hotel just outside of Sheffield where we are based. And we went to protect this hotel, and the fascists came and they overruled us. They ran the size of them was 1,000 of them, about 200 of us, and the police moved us away. The violence that I saw that day was an act of terrorism. They attacked the hotel, they broke in, they burned, people were terrified and locked in their room. And the government refused to call it terrorism. They called it far-right thuggery. And this, if that had been any other person that wasn't white committing that same act, it would have been terrorism. So the double standard lies in the way we describe what is happening, that these attacks are okay because they were from a white person. It hides the consequences of what has happened. And in those weeks over the summer, if you weren't white, you were advised not to go outside. In the 21st century, you were told to stay inside. It was not safe for you. The hate crimes that increased, shops went into lockdown. And this is the challenge that we face in educating people, in showing that migration is a system of division, of colonialism that keeps us separate from each other and doesn't allow us to realize our power. When we talk about migration in the UK, it is a legal second-class citizenship that people have if you are not British. You cannot vote, you cannot access welfare, you cannot work. Depending on the type of visa that you have, you are defined as someone who is not worthy, is different. And this whole term of illegal immigrants, there is no one who is illegal. Everyone is a human, and we've defined these borders, and if you pass a certain border, you are now illegal. And this shows the humanity that has been lost, and the understanding of people for moving, which again hides the colonial past and present of why people have moved. As I said, our chair, he was 17 years destitute. He was not able to live his life in the UK. But instead of showing the truth, we are manipulated in this system of the people are false. They're claiming stuff that hasn't happened to them. And if you are coming here as a refugee to the UK, if you do receive a refugee status, you have 56 days to leave your accommodation. You have 56 days left of your payments from the government, and you are left on your own. So you are expected to navigate a foreign country, to learn how to apply for jobs when you couldn't work in the first place. It was a crime to work when you were awaiting your status. And this is not enough time. I work in advice for older people in the UK, and you'll get your welfare payments within 2 months. So you are forced to be destitute. These are policies of forced destitution. If you have your asylum claim refused, you are forced to be destitute again, because in 21 days you lose your accommodation and welfare payments. And what this means is people are managed and controlled and have no freedom because they're reliant on a state. And when I was at this counter protest to protect this hotel, a woman shouted out across to me, "They are costing us taxpayers. They are charging us. They are lazy." And no, I shouted back to her, it was not their choice to have this policy where they are dependent on a government. It was the government's choice. And she retorted racist rhetoric back to me. And this is the kind of dynamic that you're dealing with, where people would rather blame this minority for the problems that the capitalist colonial government has created in the first place. And these gaps of people being left destitute and without housing because of their migration status, this is intentional, and it's intentional to cause violence and punishing and pain to people. And I'm a trustee for a charity that was set up to house people who are left in this situation. And this is it, the third sector charities, they fill this gap intentionally left by the state. And the state that is Western, and it is perpetrating this abuse. What Vidi really focused on is detention. And immigration detention is something that most people in the UK don't know. Detention comes in many forms. So if you have not your full citizenship or leave to remain in the UK, you will have to report to the government, you have to go and sign, you have to say that you are still here. You can be tagged, so as if you're a prisoner, you have a curfew, a tag on your ankle, or you are subject to immigration detention. And these are prisons, worse than a prison, because the UK is exceptional in the fact that it has what's called indefinite detention. So what this means is that when you are detained, you don't know how long you will be in there for. And this could be months, it could be years, it could be weeks. And people have no freedom, they are exploited, they are forced to do forced labor by the companies that run these institutions. I did my research at university on the lived experience of people who are in detention, and the testimonies that I read, it was heartbreaking, it was devastating, because these institutions are built to create violence, to create abuse, to systematically deprive people of their rights and cause harm. And this is legal in the UK, and no one seems to know or to care or want to talk about it. And we organize against it. We have shut down detention centers before, but they are just increasing the detention centers. They're increasing the capacity. In the last year, since the government, the left-wing government, in inverted commas, came in, they've increased the amount of detention. They've increased the deportations. So there is no backing in the main government of kindness, of not causing harm to people. It is intensely colonial. It's intensely fascist against people. The conditions in these centers are appalling, and to access any legal aid to fight your case, you do not have access to legal aid. You get 33 minutes of legal aid in someone who might not speak your language. And if then you want more legal aid, you are subject to a means test that is dependent on your income. And also, if your case has a 50% chance of succeeding, that is how you would receive legal aid in the UK. And what this means is people have to represent themselves, are not accessible to an interpreter, have people miscommunicating their case, so they are not allowed a free, fair trial. This is a biased system. But even still, people who are detained, 85% of people are released. So 85% of people who are subject to such abuse have, even in the racist laws that govern detention, there is no case for the government still to hold them. So these are unnecessary harm that is just there to punish people. Detention is justified that it is there to help facilitate deportations, to help people prevent from absconding, from leaving. Well, I've asked, where would they leave to? They have £50 a week. They cannot leave the country. They have no passport. So how are people leaving? It's a false conceptualization of the problem that allows a system that is to abuse people instead and to cause harm just because of where they've come from. There are no white immigrants in detention centers. People are of color there. They are not white European people. And this means that it is so clear that the people who they view as a problem in migration are people of color. They are not white. And that is that privilege, that system that continues to exclude and harm people. The whole system of the UK's migration system is called the hostile environment. They are proud. It is to be hostile by design, to try and deter people from coming is the idea behind it. But instead, people come and they are subject to such abuse and discrimination under this system. And to be a legal policy that infringes on every single human right possible, it's unbelievable. And it is to only mention the private interest that exists within detention centers. It's the conflation of capitalism and colonialism. These companies run detention centers. They make insane amount of profits. They get £1 million contracts from the government. And they make people work in detention for £1 a day. Forced labor, and that is money that the companies are saving on getting contractors in. And so it is abuse of people just because of where they have come from. These systems, they interact, and it is that conflation of profit, of capitalism that maintains this migration system that is to punish people. This practicing of borders, of patrol, it is an extensive network of markets and endless accumulation for capitalists, of the technology that is involved in borders, of passports, of the detention estate, and it is abusive. And what it does is it dehumanizes people and removes that history that we are talking about. They have the ideas of good practice in managing migration. Good practice is celebrated as a point system. A point system is very, very reminiscent of how slaves were rated on different attributes of having good teeth, of being strong. A point system of migration. This is placing value on people for certain attributes. What is the difference here? It is colonialism still. And these are seen as favorable, as only you have to be worthy to come to the UK. If you commit a crime and are a migrant in the UK, you will be deported as well. It's automatic. So it's saying if you do a crime, just like any British person would do a crime, you don't have a right to be here. You're not worthy anymore. So where that double standard is just so evident about policing and controlling people and creating that harm because of the color of their skin. Migration is one manifestation of colonialism in the UK. And it is very, very hard and challenging to organize against it. This is what capitalism created, such a minimal amount of energy, time, of existence of people to be involved in organizing. But we are here and we are strong, and it is our individual power that makes us to connect and challenge these systems. But unfortunately, even with activism as well, within these groups that are meant to be doing good, they are subject to these same biases. In Sheffield, we have a whole network of different groups of organizing. It's very different to the rest of the UK, and it's all voluntary made, but the people who are volunteering and organize these groups are majorly white. They do not have lived experience, which, okay, every voice and an ally, I'm exactly that person myself. However, they exclude those voices instead. I finished my university degree and I went to an organization in Sheffield, and what I witnessed was exactly what I studied, that people of color's voices were excluded, people were talked over, were not listened to. And what that shows is that you have to challenge it even within what you're organizing and be critical. And what Vidi and we are trying to do, being led by lived experience, is to highlight these problems and to criticize this whole structure that we are living under, rather than just talking about little elements of it. It's a whole thing that governs the world, it governs colonialism and the extent of which fascism is allowed to continue whilst we are subjugated to abuse. In Vidi, we have done many things in a short amount of time. We ran a conference with Kofi, with Pifacol last year. We run fundraising events, we do talks, we do speeches, we do learning sessions, and we are only 5 members still. So it's very, very small, and it's very hard to build on that capacity when we're all, I work full time, other members have lots of other dedications and subject to the abuse of being in the UK as a person of color and a migrant. But we are here, we are strong, and I just want to say that, you know, we have to secure the planet's future, but only by dismantling colonialism and migration. And this is reparative justice to do so, because if you try and reparations in monetary form, for example, it's not challenging and changing what the migration system that abuses and marginalizes people of color in the UK. You have to dismantle that, and only then will the planet be secure. And I just want to finish on a Gaelic phrase, so the Irish indigenous language, and it's Chakiala, which stands for our day will come. And I think it's really important that our day is coming, and we will fight back, and we will get together and combat capitalism in this way. But we have to be united, and for that day to come and to challenge everything that I've just said. So thank you very much for your time, everybody.
Yeah, it is particularly these voices of young people racialized as white, but defiant of the consequences of the 1884, 1885, sorry. Yeah, the consequences of the decisions that a few made in their name, you know, which today is ruining lives. And that is the challenge that, you know, we face, because there's a lot of talk going around, but the everyday genocide that is happening still as a result of these things, many people who pretend to be far more learned than the rest of us, you know, don't see. And even if they see, they are only prepared to write books and deliver lectures about them, not take the kind of practical actions that the likes of Eve, you know, are taking. So hearing her today, you know, gives us immense hope. Thank you, Eve. We'll go straight on to Gail, Dr. Gail Bradbrook, who is a co-founder of Extinction Rebellion that, you know, with all its challenges, did rock, you know, Britain for a while. You know, Gail is still on that road, and that's why she's here. Yeah.
Thank you, Kofi. Thank you, Eve. So just wanted to talk a little bit about a sense of where some of the social movements are in the UK. I certainly don't speak for them, and I certainly don't connect with all of them. But we are there living with the consequences of a system that's at least 5,000 years old, that spawned things like the Berlin Conference, and also did its own damage in the UK. The burning of the witches happened before colonialism. There was first the colonization of women's bodies, the clearances, and there were rebellions and resistances in the UK that are often not spoken about. The Peasants' Revolt, for example, was started because the tax collectors started looking at women's skirts to see if they were if they'd had sex or not, basically, assaulted them to decide whether to take tax off them, and that's when the people rose up. But we don't learn these things at school. So I'm a daughter of a coal miner, and one of the things that happens in the environmental movement is that we're separated along class lines. I went on to study science. I worked in the NGO sector, the non-governmental organisation sector with charities, got to see the bullshit that's in there. I worked with the Tax Justice Network, and on economic justice, and then into forms of activism. And I'd set up something called Compassionate Revolution, which intended to be acts of art, heart, and civil disobedience. We've rebranded it Rising Up, and it feels important to say that little bit of history, because Extinction Rebellion was meant to be a campaign, and it sort of took off. It became known in 75 different countries. And it wasn't the Compassionate Revolution was founded more in a sense of history and the context, and we did this campaign. So you end up having this campaign that looks very unrooted in context, in an overstanding of why there's climate change is happening. So as at least having been in the tax and economic justice sector when money flooded into Extinction Rebellion, I was with the understanding that it wasn't our money. And so we initiated a form of sharing, which I've come to understand came from a place of in me that was partially tokenistic and partially reparatory. I'm on my own journey, right? And we shared some money with the XR Internationalist Solidarity Network. Then we started to work together in 2021 more closely. And there was a experience then of marginalization to understand when you start to try and link more closely with the visionary and leaders of colours and cultures in your movement, to have that direct experience of marginalization. But as we know from permaculture, it's on the margins where the interesting things happen. Together with Kofi, we formed XR, Being the Change Affinity Network, which had the intention of doing part of that educational work through the Planet Repairs Action Learning Education Revolution, and to look at how we can locally link across communities. As part of that, I had the deep honor of being invited on a delegation last year from Paris, the Pan-African Reparations Internationally Standing Conference, to the Alliance of the Sahel States to meet the decolonial struggles that are happening there right now. I can say more about that. But one of the things that's became very clear, and I just really to honor my uncle Kofi here, to be eldered. I often say of Kofi, it's like being around old growth forest, you know, the wisdom and, you know, the patience sometimes. And anyway, you know, we all bring our stuff, right? But to be lifting up the history of resistance in the UK and to help people who are racialized as white to walk with some dignity and to remember that we're not part of the, well, we are part of the systems, but we have choice to unhook ourselves from these systems. So one of the things when you're challenged with making local links with community-to-community connections is what the hell is community anymore in the UK when we're so embedded in a neoliberal system. It has, of course, been denuded. We are separated, and the hard right's taking advantage of that. Some people in the movements are somewhat in shock at the rise of fascism and talking about these times being like the 1930s. I mean, 2008 was when the 1930s started again, right? This has been coming for some time. But it is a time when the movements are experiencing the fallacies and delusions that we've been subjected to. There's a revelation, there's a delamination, the so-called functioning democracy, the idea that the economic system is not that great, but it's the best one we could have. There's this comfort in modernity's story of progress. All of these things are falling away for some people. Of course, for many people, there was never a delusion. Those delusions have been built on the back of other people's bodies, of global majority communities and lands being used to build those actual delusions. I've discovered in my perimenopause that I'm autistic, and that's why a modern day witch, one up for the neurodivergence here, we probably all are. So one of the things that comes with that is a fascination with patterns and systems, and I've been looking at meta-movement ecology strategy for some time. The climate system, of course, is changing right now. We don't actually know what's going to happen to the UK. The AMOC stands for the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation could collapse, in which case the UK would be plunged into colder temperatures, and yet we talk about global heating. So it's actually quite difficult to prepare, but the climate systems, as they fall to pieces, will impact the food systems, which are already stretched because they are part of the sort of neoliberal project. And from that, you'll get second and third order effects in the finance systems, the extractive finance systems, and then to the so-called civilization that we live in is starting to fall to pieces. Some people think it went into collapse in 2015. That started. It depends which data you look at. So in this question of what does it mean to be in community in these times, what I've started to work on recently are collapse preparing communities, looking at the infrastructure, as in what are we going to do about our water, our food, our waste, our transport, the social structure, how are we going to make decisions together, you know, assemblies, logistics, and the superstructure, the values and culture, the rematriation processes that we're in ourselves, you know. There's something about mitigating for the harm that we're in and the ordeal to come, and the emergence that's possible as well, that we can bring our gifts, that everybody can bring their gifts. So part of that will be the necessity of federating decision-making bodies across the UK and building power that way. Fundamentally talking about building power. I'm talking about building power across communities out of necessity. We'll either cooperate in the times that are going to come. We'll either relearn how to cooperate and relearn how to actually be with our land and know the actual value of the water that we're with, or that the ordeal and the depravity is going to be even worse. We're going to need to use those muscles that I believe that we've been testing in things like Extinction Rebellion, the non-violent direct action, the civil disobedience. Some people are going more underground into sabotage these days. Those muscles that have been waking up are going to be needed to protect our water bodies. Sabotage or bill strikes, they're going to be needed for resisting conscription, deportations, evictions, and so on. So there's a really sort of cross-movement, community-focused necessity that's emerging. And I mentioned being sort of autistic systems thinker. It turns out, from a systems point of view, what we're defining is what's called a third attractor. So as these systems fall to pieces, they can either go into sort of chaos, the sort of Mad Max sort of vibe, or they fall into an even worse state, you know, AI-enabled pockets of techno-bro, surveillance, fascism, etc. The delamination I talked about, that worsening with, if you know about that, the TESCREAL philosophies of people like Elon Musk, to pull it into a new state, which fundamentally is a spiritual process underpinning that. It's a rematriation, it's a repair, it's a reparatory process. It is going to need that power to be built in communities. It's a slow and deliberate process. And part of that is locally linking. So in my town in Stroud, and I'm sure we've got some Stroudies here, yay for the Stroudies, we've also built a project called Sister, which is part of the Prayler process, Stroud in international solidarity together for earth repairs. And so those connections are not only about trying to build the new systems and resist the harms of this current one, they're also, you know, with respect to the type of thing that Amitav Ghosh talks about in the Nutmeg's Curse. We don't know in the global north how to meet times of collapse. We're dependent, we're in comfort seeking, we're in denial. We're fucked, basically. And we need to relearn some of that. And so with humility, hoping that family in the global south will be part of, you know, that reparatory journey, connecting together, that we'll also learn how to survive. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Gail. I think it's important for people, those of us, even from the global south, who are living in the global north, to recognize the fact that, you know, societies here and institutions are in collapse. And there is the history of whenever threats are faced by particularly European societies, you know, there are tendencies that would really, you know, want to even exacerbate dehumanization and attack, you know, the rest of humanity and the planet Earth. You know, whether that is what would happen again is up to us. And this event is part of that process of us organizing, you know, to ensure that there is not a repetition of history, because we all know, the planet cannot survive a third world war, right? So, let's take seriously what we are faced with, and contrary to what some people suggest, we still have a chance to save the planet, and in that process, save ourselves. Let's take this very, very seriously. I hope technically we are ready for Marianne to join us. Are we? That's for our tech friends to tell us. Okay.
Yes. Hello. Good morning. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
It's a pleasure to be here today, and it's also an honor, and may all the ancestral blessings as well come upon us. May our ancestors be our guidance, and let them bless all these meetings. Let them also give us the necessary faith and the necessary as well wisdom in order to conduct all what we are meant to do here. Shall I just proceed, or do you want to say something before?
No, go ahead.
Okay, so I greet everybody online and in presence, and I'll be able to join the meeting tomorrow. When we talk about repair, and we talk about healing, when we talk about healing, maybe we can develop it along 4 or 3 to 4 dimensions: cosmos, collectivity, community, and care. Let's first talk about care. One of the members of this group talks about the way we have been deprived of our humanity, meaning that if you enter a bus, if you enter a tramway, I'm based here also in Germany, nobody would ever, or hardly anybody will say hello. So actually the first step toward depriving somebody of one's humanity is not to acknowledge this person as a human being. And it can be done in very small steps. And that is one. Because, if you enter any place, let's say in Cameroon, if you don't say hello, and this happened for instance, to us when we stayed too long in Germany, and then suddenly you enter any place and you don't say hello, and people say hello, meaning that the first thing you have to do is to acknowledge somebody's humanity and presence. And that is also part of the care. Care doesn't mean that you really take care of somebody on a daily basis. It can be something smaller. Yesterday, I was doing the night. There was a video about an elder who was teaching people, and it was a story about a little bird that collapsed from the net, and nobody was actually taking care of. Meaning that what we have to see is that the care is towards the people or animals, entities, or the elements of the cosmos that are in the most vulnerable situation. So the first healing and repair has to do with the cosmic dimension. The burning of the witches was mentioned already. But let's go a little bit more towards the even back in the past, in the most remote past. You know, if you have a look at what happened during this 19th century conference, the Berlin-Congo Conference, so-called Berlin-Congo Conference, 1884, 1885, it has been actually not the division, but the sealing of the division, and at the same time, the sealing of a particular way of looking at life, cosmos, and humanity. Because from that, and from that time on, museums were built, meaning that the systematic killing, not only of people, but also of entities, the killing and the plundering, the systematic killing, plundering, massacring, and genociding was amplified. This led to a way to see the world in which actually there was talk about repatriation, about women, and which were actually in the core of African civilization, were deprived of their humanity and role. You remember that when we talk about the Ma'at in Kemet, the Ma'at was embodied by a woman. Wisdom, social balance, justice, truth, and many other elements were embodied by a woman, meaning as well by the body of a woman. And since the disruption of Kemet, but also since we actually, in various African communities, we have abandoned this ancestral wisdom, many things were wrong. So when we talk about healing and repair, we have also to go back to this dimension, this cosmic dimension. And this is what I think the rematriation movement is also all about, to go back to indigenous knowledge, and not only to going back, we know about Sankofa, this Akan symbol. You go back to retrieve something from the past, but also in order to have a better understanding of present and the present challenges, in order to build up the future. And the future cannot only be a future when this cosmic balance that has been completely distorted and disturbed and destroyed is coming back, but reinvented with a new situation that we have now. And it also has to do with the way we see as well this cosmic dimension in where we are, meaning that we're not above anything. We are part of the cosmos. We are part of nature. We are part of the air, part of the fire, part of the earth, and part of the water are the four elements defining life. So this is where we find again our path it's towards reconnecting with these four elements and with the whole cosmos. Then we can say that we're on the way to repair, at least to my understanding. The second dimension can be collectivity, community. The upsurge of the far right and extremism and fascism has been also already mentioned, meaning that it is a really upsetting way of seeing collectivity and community. And with our ancient knowledge, when we know that every, you know about two with Ubuntu, meaning that everybody is a parcel of deity. of a godly, of the godly, then in that case, if we, and Bantu is a collective dimension of it, meaning that you cannot be without me, without us all, and I cannot be without the whole collectivity. If we base our understanding of collectivity on this foundation, meaning that we have a new path which is actually a very old path, a very ancient path, that is open as well to healing. So we have cosmos, collectivity, community, and care. And what does it mean actually concretely, especially in terms of reparation? You know, some people here in Germany, they talk about remigration. The first elements, the first people that should re-immigrate is our entities, all those who are kept and jailed in our in the museums.
No, hello? We come up with a technical hitch again. So the connection has dropped. Yeah. So what do we do? Okay. Whilst we try and sort that out, we will now invite Piwaba Adokwe from South Africa. Join us from South Africa. That some of us prefer to call by, their name Azania, to share some words with us. And also talk about the Aepppradif satellite groundings that are happening in, South Africa, Ghana, and other parts. Fiaba, you can introduce yourself.
The show must go on after all. I prefer greeting while standing. And thereafter, I'm just going to sit down. And my greeting will not be a normal one. It's a greeting that we always use in political spaces or spaces of engagement, such as these ones. So I will say Amandla, which is the power. The response is Ngawetu, which it is ours. I tried this in the UK and I assumed people would know, so that's why I'm explaining this time around. so that at least there's some response. And I think it's also a very important reminder when you make such an assertion. So let me start there and then let me greet properly. Amandla. Amandla. Thank you very much. So my name is Piwaba Madokwe. As Uncle had said, I am from a country in Africa called South Africa. I usually say I'm an African based in South Africa. Above everything else, it is because of our disregard and our attempt at erasing the colonial bodies that have put us and even assigned countries and states and places to us. I will be speaking a lot more on the workshop that we'll be having on decolonized education. But I think that it was very important that also I come into this session to just highlight to the plenary here today that when we speak about the Berlin Conference, one of the first things that we say is that it happened without the voices of Africans. It happened in the exclusion of African communities. But it happened with the subject being Africa itself. And what the Aepppradif had aims to do is to actually link the conversation between African communities and we would say people of conscience in Europe and across the world as well. And it is for that reason that we have what we call satellite groundings. So these satellite groundings are such that as we are sitting here today, we are co-convening this gathering with our brothers and sisters in South Africa. Unfortunately, there's the technical issue, but I think at one point we'll connect them to come and join you. So there is a gathering of this sort happening simultaneously in South Africa. It is happening in Ghana, and it is also happening in Burkina Faso and Colombia as well. And it is primarily because, like we said, anything that has to do with Africa cannot happen. Any conversation cannot happen without not just the African continent, but African communities as well. Because in most cases, whenever there are these types of conversations, in particular in relation to the continent, they are usually held at very high level with politicians and NGOs and officials and all of those things. And in most cases, the voices of communities are seldom heard. I remember when we were speaking yesterday, one thing that was very important that we also need to keep in mind is that as much as we're speaking about the 140 years since the Berlin Conference, and we are sitting here, all of us collectively, including the satellite groundings, to not only reflect on its harms, but we're here to also collectively devise tactics on how to undo that harm. How do we actually collectivize our efforts and respond to what is already happening in the world over? And that being the case, it means that it is important that we have these conversations as a collective. So the satellite groundings, as much as we are having this gathering here and we're going to be splitting into workshops, they are also going to be having the exact same workshops. And then we are going to bring in all those resolutions as a collective resolution. And that is primarily because we needed to also highlight as well that there are indigenous communities who are constantly in struggle, who are constantly in resistance. Because we said that this moment is not just, as much as we're just speaking about the Berlin Conference, we're also speaking about the ongoing coloniality and the ongoing imperialism that is happening currently in our territories and in our communities, and how we are responding to those. So it is very important that we also keep that in mind, that basically this is a dialogue between African communities of resistance, indigenous communities, and peace-loving and people of consciousness across the world, including the community of Berlin, where actually the conversation of actually splitting our communities, of actually partitioning our land, of killing our people actually started. And therefore, it is important that we sit here today and we actually try to undo that history the best way we know how, because it is not just a history, it is a lived reality. So we're not speaking about 140 years since the Berlin Conference. We're speaking about 140 years of ongoing harm. It's not even 140, it actually even precedes that, So what is also important about having these kinds of networks and these gatherings is us highlighting the need for international solidarity, which is something that has not just happened now. It's not a new conversation. It has happened before. It has happened immediately, by the way, after the Berlin Conference. It happened continuously as well. And that is why we actually now need to reconnect those live wires. Uncle Expo in Ghana, for instance, when we were speaking about his community struggles, he highlighted that they are already responding to, and they are still organizing as communities, And it is important that while we know that this is happening in Ghana, what is happening in South Africa, what is happening in the AES, and that is what these satellite groundings actually aim to do, where we are actually saying that there's active resistance, there's active organizing, there's active programs and initiatives that we want to actually bring through to the rest of the world in terms of what we are doing. Because we're not sitting there as victims and trying to figure out what needs to happen, how do we respond. There's responses already that are happening. And that is why we need to actually, and these responses are not just happening at high level, they're happening on the ground. So we might look at, for instance, the Berlin Conference. When we think about the Battle of Isandlwana, we speak about the Battle of Adwa. Those battles are still happening even to this day, and we need to bring that to the fore, that we know that communities at this very moment are responding. And they're not responding in terms of just dialogue, but actual action. There are actually people who are being displaced as we speak. There are people who are being killed as we speak. There are people who don't even have an opportunity to bury their loved ones. And it is because of what happened, the decision that was taken 140 years ago about the African continent. So what then becomes the responsibility of the international community at this point in time to actually not just have this conversation, but what is the action? Because if we're saying that currently, as we are speaking right now, people are being displaced, people are being killed. They do not even have an opportunity, because I think it's also saying that thing, we are burying our loved ones. They don't even have an opportunity to bury their loved ones. They leave them there because they are running away from this and this and this and that. So what is the response of the international community? Because this is a lived reality. It is not in the history books as we would want to keep it as if it's like some moment in time. It's something that is ongoing. There are responses, and we are doing that on our end, but we need collective, because whether we like it or not, the people who are in Europe, the people who are in the global north, they are actually benefiting to a certain extent from our suffering. And therefore, how is it that they then respond to the systems that actually cushion them with our blood, with our sweat, and with our bodies, and with our lives? I think also it is important that in closing, because I think we'll speak more as well in the workshops, mine was really to introduce the satellite groundings, but I will then have to introduce them formally in their absence. I did highlight, for example, that we do have our satellite grounding in Ghana. And I will not dwell much, because I think that we do have even the satellite grounding, we do have our representatives, our brothers and sisters as well in this panel as well. So some of the people who are in the satellite groundings will also be forming part of the workshops online. So they are not just there as well, but they will also be partaking in the workshops and exchanging with you. So we do have also from Colombia, in Palenque de Sabalcilo, which is actually one of the first liberated territories by African enslaved people. So they are also part of that. They're also joining us. And it is important as well that we highlight this, because that is actually millions of Africans whose cord to the motherland has actually been cut. And they are actually people who are yearning to have this conversation, not just with the international community, but their brothers and sisters in the African continent as well. So we must not actually take lightly the importance and even the spiritual consequences, not necessarily consequences, but the spiritual work and the decolonial work that this conversation is happening, where we are actually really rebuilding communities, African communities. We are actually also making sure that we interact and we connect with our brothers and siblings in different parts of the world. I think with that being said, I will close. I'm not sure, do we have another session, Uncle, or do I keep speaking? All right.
Thank you, Piava. I think we have the opportunity now to hear some questions.
In this current period, heard about this morning, heard about the yesterday, and we're hearing a lot. Whether it's worth going as deep as we possibly can, and that means maybe going as far back as we can, to think about and how to compare the changes that we're going through and gain an understanding of what it is that we're going through at the moment. I'm thinking that 12,000 years ago, there was a comparable moment in the history of our species when the ice age began to recede and the planet started warming. And what this led to in the human species was a radical reorganization of the sexual division of labor. This, if we talk about patriarchy, not really.
I need the mic for the people online.
Sorry, I'm sorry. Yeah, hello, people online. Sorry. That this radical movement happened. If we talk about there being a patriarchy now, we have to think historically as to when that patriarchy started to occur. When was the takeover of the human species by the male gender or sex committed? When did it start? And you could say verifiably that it started at that point, at the point where the Ice Age was ending and human beings began to move critically from being hunter-gatherers to being sedentary and to occupying the land in a different way, husbanding animals and cultivating fields in a different way. And I just wonder whether it might be worth looking at what the connection is between that environmental change that happened then and the kind of environmental changes that are happening now in terms of the depth of the changes to the human species that happened then and is probably happening now. Are we looking at an unraveling of that takeover that happened in the Neolithic Revolution 12,000 years ago that is taking place now in our world? And how much can we see, and does that give us an understanding of the sense of that movement? I mean, I'm thinking that, for example, in each of us, we go through a process and movement of change and understanding as we grow into our adulthood in our lives. And I mean, there are various people that have been in situations that have tried to understand what that movement might be. I mean, for example, Antonio Gramsci was in a prison under the Mussolini regime in Italy. And that led him to thinking. He's like a little kind of seed in a pod or a person in a hut having to think through what on earth was happening in the world. And he started to look at these processes of catharsis, of the movement from the what you might describe as the idea that the objective interests of people had to be surpassed and transcended so that people began to understand what their subjective and spiritual interests were. And he described this as being a movement towards assuming an understanding that was properly attributable to the species being. In other words, this was the consciousness of us as human beings, as a species, amongst species, and having a relationship with other species. Because we all know that our species is in crisis, but it's not an intra-species crisis. It's an interspecies crisis. We're in crisis with other species. So this is the depth of the movement that we're thinking, I think is maybe taking place. So I'm referring to Antonio Gramsci only simply because there we have an example of that he's saying maybe we in our lives are feeling these movements of change, and these movements of change are historic. They go back to our ancestors, back to that moment, perhaps, before which women, human females, were the basic formation of human society. Human females formed human society, and at a certain point, men, for good reasons, committed themselves to a takeover of that society. What did that takeover amount to, and what did it mean? And are we now going through a comparable unraveling of that movement? Thank you.
Yeah, well, what do other people think? I mean, that's a very profound, analysis, and I could comment on it for another hour or so. But remind us of Engels, the origin of the family, private property, and the state. That's something interesting to study. But what do other people think? I think that that's calling us to think deeply about this times, but also to reflect on the precedents in history. I think that's what is called for now. What do other people think?
Can I say
Are we
something?
able to comment via this line?
Yeah, go on.
I heard what he said, but I think for each problem, we have to take it gradually. Like right now, we're talking about reparation. And then I think we cannot grab the whole problem like at once. We have to take it step by step, bit by bit, before we get to that point. Like going back to the history, that would be for me, that would be the wish. I mean, that's where we should all get into. But till then, we have small steps we have to take towards ourselves, toward what's happening right now in Germany, to what's happening right now in Congo or in South Africa, in Colombia. I mean, that's we have to have like an hierarchy of things we have to tackle and solve before we move to that direction. And by doing this, we're actually moving to that direction. I don't know if you got my point. I think it's as simple as that. Thank you.
Hallo, maybe.
Ich kann leider nur Deutsch sprechen, wenn es das
Yeah, go
okay
on.
ist. Danke. Ich bin Paula und komme aus Kolumbien und habe da auch deinen Punkt verstanden. Finde aber, dass es halt wichtig ist, dass wir mit uns selber anfangen und mit unserer Umgebung, mit unseren Communities. Dass wir anfangen, auch die Kämpfe von anderen zu sehen und zu begleiten und zu unterstützen. Und dass wir auf jeden Fall auf die grenzenlose Solidarität kommen. Dass wir aus diesem Zyklus des Imperialismus und des Kolonialismus rauskommen müssen. Und es ist auch super wichtig zu verstehen, dass es nicht mehr mit Gewalt geht. Dass wir müssen mit den ganzen Kriegen enden. Und wir dürfen nicht mehr gewalttätig sein, weil das, wenn wir damit anfangen, wenn wir die Gewalt in uns dekonstruieren, dann können wir auf jeden Fall eine Veränderung erzielen. Und wir sind jetzt verantwortlich, um das alles zu ändern. Genau.
Can somebody? Yeah.
Sorry, just to say,
Maybe it's possible to
Yeah,
also.
exactly. Sorry, can I briefly say something, just a technical point?
Intervene.
There are translations from German to English available. You've seen that outside. If, in case you haven't, just to say, for a card, you can get those little headphones that you can get, and then get the translations for those who didn't. Because I'm seeing also a lot of the panelists don't have the translations right now.
Yeah.
Do you want to kind of maybe briefly?
Yeah. Can you do that?
Do you maybe want to kind of briefly? Magst du vielleicht nochmal die, wenn du eine konkrete Frage hast oder sowas, die würde ich dann direkt spontan so übersetzen? Oder einfach nochmal kurz. Okay, oder einfach nochmal, wenn du nochmal in 2 Sätzen sagen möchtest oder so.
Wie können wir schaffen, eine parallele Struktur, in der wir die globalen Süden zusammen verbinden, um unter uns grenzenlose Solidarität und auch politische und Ressourcen austauschen können?
Her question is, how can we build an international structure across the global south that is able to exchange or build the solidarities and exchange of resources as well, that's powerful enough for the task ahead? Noch was dazu?
Excellent question.
I think they were also responding to the comments from people before and saying that we have to stop like being violent and going to war. And it also starts within ourselves, like personally to deconstruct our violent behaviors and then like transmitting this and practicing this within our respective communities before like going like really big. That's how I understood it. And through like this change of behavior and attitudes that we can somehow like live and exist in a new world somehow. Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is why I wish we had a long time for this kind of conversations, because it is the exchanges amongst us, that would, serve our Aepppradif purpose. Those of us who are here are just to share our perspectives and stimulate, conversation. But we don't have enough time for that. I hope that the workshops, will be used, effectively for you to have your say and delve into these issues, because these are the very profound issues that needs to be tackled. I don't want to take more time. Anybody else wants to say something? Okay, what is it?
I think they want to speak, no?
What is it?
Yes, we online, we wanted also to say a few things.
Okay. Go ahead.
Okay, so to begin with, you have, there was this intervention about when did it start with the taking over and the abandoning of a woman-centered kind of world. It's difficult to say, but you know, there's some people who say, okay, pastoral against agricultural society. But I think that what is important to see that even in agricultural societies, women were considered as the one who knows how to how to handle the seeds, so to say. That is with a deep, with a in-depth knowledge of agriculture, and that was part of the basis of also their position in society. So I think that it is, and that is what also the reasons why it was so much. I mean, women were so much at the center of a lot of knowledge. So yeah, we have to, as you were saying, it's a matter we can develop for ages and ages. I think that at the moment, in order to talk about the very strong net movement, we have to know about actually each other's history, or her story, or them story, or people's story, or stories, so that we can have a better understanding of each other. And and the knowledge of what happened in the past is the basis of what is possible for the future. You know about the story about the tree without each other's roots, in order to have a better understanding of ourselves too. And this is also why the UNDK, the second UNDK for people of African descent, is so important, because it enables us to have a look at exactly that, and to consider as well the disruptive also consequences of capitalism and egocentrism and greed. In order to build up strong movements who encompass Gaza and Haiti, South Africa and Iran, so that we have a very strong international movement. But it's hard work, and it requires in-depth knowledge about present, past, and also to have a common understanding of what you mean when we say future.
Thank you. We need to be rounding up now, because we need to have lunch and then go into the workshops.
You know, Abena Busia wrote that in liberation, you don't know what we are actually, what we are, so to say, pregnant with now. And what she also wrote, I mean, that was not an exact quote, but she said that you don't know what we are, we've been doing out the shattered pieces of our dreams. So let's leave this dream and let's go join hands together, join souls, join our minds also, to let this treasure and this fire that we have within us grow and burn, so that we do all kinds of very precious and wonderful things out of these shattered pieces of our dreams.
Thank you, Marianne. I think that these are wise words to remember, but I also want to remind us about the present-day realities for the vast majority of our people, you know, who would like to dream, but are faced with the nightmares of today and are in, you know, everyday battle, just to even, you know, defend their very right to exist for just another day on this planet. And communities that are being torn apart, you know, still as a consequence of the prolonging coloniality that's exacerbated by the 1884-1885 Berlin Conference. You know, coloniality did not start from 1884-1885. You know, it was from 1884-1885 Berlin Conference that the European powers decided to create a joint global front of attack particularly on African people, but also on the vast majority of humanity, and decided to do so with excessive violence that persists today. And let us remember that even the time and the space and the circumstances of holding this meeting today, people are paying for it in Africa, in Asia, in Abiyala, in Oceania, with their very lives, with blood, sweat, and tears. And whatever we will dream of doing, they don't have even the opportunity to dream another day. They have to take action to preserve their very lives. And this conference is about calling us to join that action, right? Not to create spaces where we do our own thing and in a very individualistic, fractured way in which, we tend to think. And there's a lot about, this is my space, I want my time, I want, to do things when I feel like it. But the vast majority of humanity, that's at the expense of which those of us, whether you are, racialized as white or black, you are in Europe or you're in America, every hour that you spend in this part of the world is at the expense of the lives of millions of the majority of humanity. And it is that the urgency of us doing something to stop the continuing genocide and ecocide, that is what this is about.
But this is why we mentioned.
Yeah, anyway, we'll continue. Laura needs to, come on. Yeah.
Sorry, hi. I'm just here to say a few things for the afternoon. Is the session, yeah? All right, okay. Hi. We'll have lunch now for 1 hour. Yeah, maybe a first applause, right, to the panel. Sorry. So we'll have food now for 1 hour. Food for Action prepared the whole morning food for us. It looks very delicious. So please donate also for Food for Action. They made a great effort for us. We will then go into the workshops from 1:30 till 6. There will be coffee and tea upstairs for the afternoon breaks. And the workshop on education for planet repairs will be here on the ground floor in the studio. The second workshop, Community Regeneration, will be on the second floor in the workshop room. And the Interfaith Harmonization workshop will be in the seminar room, also on the second floor. There will be also signs for you to guide to the second floor. There will be whisper translation available in the workshops, so please reach out to us if you need whisper translation to German. And we would also be really happy to have some support for the awareness team. So if anybody could imagine to do the awareness role, we would be really happy to have you at the registration desk. So those are my housekeeping things, and yeah.
Just to say something about the workshops, quickly. They have, again, to emphasize that this is a time for collectivizing more, the various perspectives that we have all brought into this space, into this conference, and also to steer our thoughts towards action, because this is not about just talking and talking and talking. That we've not designed this to be just a talking shop. Deliberately, we haven't. And if some people have problems with it, tough, because we chose not to have just the usual, talking shop. So as you have your thoughts, think about the actions that would flow from your thoughts, particularly those that you are prepared to do, right? Not to suggest actions for others to do, but actions that you want to be part of doing, right? And let's take that. And it is in that sense that, of course, the workshop on education is clear for people generally. The one on community regeneration also clear. But I think I've heard some, doubts about the one on interfaith. And I want to emphasize that this is not a workshop where people are supposed to be talking about their religious views, and wanting to convert people to this or that, religious faith. This is really about how do we distill from various faiths, including the faiths of indigenous peoples across the world, not just, the usual, ones we know, but the faiths of indigenous peoples across the world that they use in resistance. How do we distill, principles for action to deal, in a reparatory way with planet repairs? So feel free. You don't have to be somebody of faith, to participate in, this interfaith, workshop. Just bring your minds, hearts, and souls, into reasoning with others to come with some, action plan that will concretize what this Aepppradif is all about. Thank you very much. Enjoy your lunch.
Achi a home la rifia, you found a kujo, you found a dodge, you found a nyaj, you found a hajju. Can I bad a
Explore Nani Kofi from the Nkrumah Unity Movement and Ghana Implement Repairs Action Dialogue. Greetings to all the participants at this Africa and Europe People-to-People Planet Repairs Action Dialogue International Forum, which is coinciding with the 140th anniversary of the Berlin Conference. I first want to touch on the ethno-linguistic group which I belong to and take it from there in terms of what the scramble and partition for Africa has had on our people. There are not many nations or ethnic groups in Africa which have been battered by the so-called scramble and partition of Africa as the Bedouko group, which was originally in Nigeria and shifted westwards to where it is today as a result of the expansion of the Yoruba kingdom. Between the 13th and 15th centuries, the Bedouko group broke down into the Ebe, Fon, Aja, Tado, and Ogun or Egun groups. The Ebes are in Nigeria, Benin, Togo, and Ghana. The Fons are in Benin, the Ajas are in Benin and Togo, the Tados are in Togo. Ogun, also known as Egun, are in Benin, Nigeria, and Togo. In the 16th century, Ga and Fanti immigrants who had fled from where later became the Gold Coast and arrived in Aneho integrated with the Ebes from Gileji and Ajas originally based there. This integration developed a new variant of Bel language influenced by their original languages, by Ga and Fanti, and later even by European languages such as Portuguese, French, and German. This is Mina, which has become the dominant form of spoken Ewe in Togo and spoken in parts of Benin. The earliest European contacts with the Bedouko were on the coast. Between 1720 and 1730, the Danes and the Dutch vied for influence on the Anglo coast, centered on Kita, where the Danes built the Fort Prinsenstein. The Portuguese landed in Benin in 1472. The Germans reached inland areas in Peki in 1847 as missionaries. The other early contacts were mainly trade relations. The French reached the Kingdom of Dahomey in 1872 and in 1892 colonized the area. The British took control of the every part of the English-speaking part of the territory at that time, every part of the Gold Coast in 1874 and took control of it from the Dutch, Swedes, Danes, and Germans. On 5th May 1884, German soldiers under the imperial officer Gustav Nachtigal kidnapped some community leaders from Aneho aboard a German warship, Move, and forced them to sign the protection treaty. The Germans also, as they signed with King Lapa, who himself was a descendant of the Gans and Fantis who had fled Gold Coast and had come to Aneho. The Germans also then created Togoville, specially as a town, as the operational base for colonization. From there, they took over Lomé, which was a town set up by elders from Angloga, then taking it over and putting it in a different country from those who had inhabited the place and those who have created the place. The area became one, the area therefore, which is the core area, became one of proxy war between the British and the Germans. The Germans expelled Togbe Dagadu III of Kpando to Cameroon in 1914 and only returned in 1920 after the German colonial rule in Togoland came to an end following the First World War. The British also expelled Pastor Andreas Aku, who hailed from Peve and was sent to Fernando Po, now Bioko, Equatorial Guinea, and only returned in 1930. A student house of residence in Mali Senior High School, Ho, Ghana, is named after this pastor, Andreas Aku. Many in Ghana or elsewhere know of King Prempeh I being deported to Seychelles, but not the Betuko deportation. Betuko got divided among British, Germans, and the French, then now between French and the Equatorial Guinea, and only returned in 1930. A student house of residence in Mali Senior High School, Ho, Ghana, is named after this pastor, Andreas Aku. Many in Ghana or elsewhere know of King Prempeh I being deported to Seychelles, but not the Betuko deportation. Betuko got divided among British, Germans, and the French, then now between French and the British. There are a lot of legacies of enslavement and colonization. They are manifold. Being brief, I'll just list them. Cultural disruption and erasure, which affects our whole character of the type of people we are. Social inequality and racism as a follow-up to enslavement and colonialism. Political instability and authoritarianism. Political instability actually because of the tensions within the colonially created microstates, where the centripetal forces are less than the centrifugal forces, precisely because the attachment to sections which are culturally closer to one another across the border, and then as a result of that, what becomes tribalism within the countries and the difficulty of running politics. And as such, the authoritarianism comes in when democratic structures cannot function. Economic underdevelopment, because colonialism actually developed these colonies as an extension of the metropolis from which the colonizers came from. And so it negatively affected the development of these areas. Environmental degradation, precisely because there wasn't priority for what has to be done with the physical environment, it led to environmental degradation. And the language which is used, the colonial language, came to replace the language, so even leading to what may appear to be the death of certain language, have disparities. Infrastructure and technologies have also depended on the colonial authorities. Border disputes and conflicts. Not only disputes and conflicts, if you look at places like Mwepe in Ghana and Georgia, Mwepe in Togo and Georgia in Ghana, the border sometimes even goes through people's kitchens. And you go to Wodome, which is also on the Ghana-Togo border, where they have their well drinking water on one part of the border and then cemetery on the other part of the border. All these things are disorganized. And the psychological trauma and collective memory, the psychological trauma of colonialism, the psychological trauma of playing second fiddle to other races and nations. See, and this is why we have to look at cases of restitution and compensation. But we have to be very careful when we talk about compensation. It does not necessarily mean that we should just pack some bag of money and give to certain people. But reparations should be a form of redistribution, challenging global economic inequalities, decolonizing economies, and the role of the states have to be looked at, because the state, which is a product of colonialism, definitely continues the culture of colonialism. And that is why there has to be struggles for equality. As I introduce myself as from the pro-Nkrumah unity movement, we build ourselves on the legacy of the first president of Ghana, Kwame Nkrumah. The first president of Ghana, Kwame Nkrumah, in his first speech to the United Nations, talked about the need for just restitution. Just restitutions, which means that redressing the inequalities, so things will come back to the stage in which human beings who have been dehumanized will not continue being dehumanized, and there can be a way in which we can all develop together in harmony. And one aspect of his legacies that we take very seriously is the positive action movement of the 1950s, through which was the main event which forced the success of Ghana's independence. Nkrumah clearly understood that colonial structures cannot advance the cause of the peoples of Africa. And that is why he tried everything to build an alternative to the colonial structure which he inherited through the educational system, through the health system, the ideological institutes, the industries that he built, the workers' brigade, and all those things which laid the basis for building an alternative to the colonial system. And so we are building on that legacy. As a result of that, well, we see planet repairs, which one deals with addressing the inequalities and inequalities, and also the disruption between human relations as one pillar. Also, the disruption between human relations as one pillar, and then dealing with the physical environment and the environmental degradation, which I mentioned earlier on as part of the legacies of colonialism. And we have been through that. We have been using the grassroots approach. Part of the grassroots approach is the introduction of Pan-Africanist and planet repairs street parliaments, where we get people ordinary people who would not have had the opportunity to be in parliament or district assemblies, contribute their views, and so that we can be building an alternative. We are also setting up what we call UNESCO GEC clubs and UNESCO green clubs, which we are setting up in schools. We are also setting it up in the communities. And then we also have cooperation with various organizations. The Ghana in Planet Repairs Action Dialogue, which I talked about, to work together with the Nkrumah Unity Movement, the Africa Continental Unity Party, and other forces in building what we call the Positive Action Citizens Coalition. The Positive Action Citizen Coalition now is developing a partnership with the Trade Union Congress of Ghana, and with active participation from the General Transport Petroleum Chemical Workers Union and Public Utility Workers Union, who are very active in the anti-privatization campaign we have just initiated. This grassroots campaign will be able to help us work across the borders. One of the things we do is the work across the ethno-linguistic areas. Say, for example, the Gbeduko, that we try to work all across the Gbeduko boundaries, and because we realize that when Nkrumah said the independence of Ghana is meaningless unless it was linked with the total unity of the African continent, it is only African unity which will solve this problem. The facts that are present with the Gaddafi-initiated African Union, we have a skeleton. What to do with it is how to deal with the skeleton, so that the actual body around the skeleton is one that advances the cause of revolutionary Pan-Africanism or radical African unity, a borderless Africa where we have one Africa, one voice. And so we are thinking even about things of common trade fair along the borders, which of people who used to work together as a people before the intervention of the Europeans, which have destroyed the kind of unity which existed among the Gbeduko and these languages, which are very, very close to one another. is the pro-Nkrumah Unity movement, which is spearheading this action of the Positive Action Citizens Coalition. These grassroots activities will help us in addressing the disunity which has been created by the European invasion, and also help raise the consciousness of people so that through our UNESCO GET clubs, through our Pan-Africanist and Planet Repairs street parliaments, we'll build the embryo of the future society, which will be an alternative to the exploitative society which colonialism and enslavement have introduced. One Africa, one voice.
Dear all Africans, Pan-Africanists all over the world, I have been asked a contribution about the Pan-Africanist decolonization philosophy and how we can share, create, shape new concepts for the emancipation of African people all over the world. I think the first thing to do is to renew the consciousness of the deep African history. In our education programs, from the primary school to the university, we must put all our energy in rooting African individuals' consciences in a deep understanding and knowledge of the main steps of African history, not only on African continent, but also all over the world. By teaching that deep and long African history to our children, we will build citizens who are not only rooted in our family story, who are not only rooted in our national or continental or racial story, but we will have consciences rooted in the Pan-Africanist vision of African humanity. So that, in fact, somebody who is well educated in knowing the deep and the profound past of the African people, to African continent and to all its diasporas, will be able to challenge tribalism, clientelism, nepotism, all those things which are clearly some prisons for our minds in our different African countries. But the number two of the decolonization process is to teach to every student that it is very important for a free human being to shape and to create his own concepts by his experience, by his knowledge, and through the comparison of what he knows, what he has learned with what other people know, what other people have learned. So that comparative knowledge is very important for the African citizen of today. If you compare African knowledge to European knowledge or globally Western knowledge or Asian knowledge or American knowledge, you will see that there are three main categories which are fundamental principles of African way of thought. The category of truth, the category of justice, and the category of solidarity. These are the three permanent principles of African civilization. By truth, we mean seeking deep knowledge in each step of our lives. By justice, we understand that we have to give to everyone what is his income in all the situations of the life. We have to impeach all kind of arbitrary fake rights in the society. We have to fight against inequalities between all the human beings, being them men or women. We have to work for social complementarity of women and men. And we have to enforce the traditional family built on the father, the mother, and the children. See, so for me, this is the second thing, help African people to be able to compare and to defend their own principles. And the third principle is the principle of solidarity, which means that never we must abandon one of ourselves on the road alone, without clothes, without house, without health, without education, without family, without love. With those three principles, we can renew the shape of our institutions, being them economic, political, spiritual, being them educational, and what else you can think. We have three fundamental principles, and those principles must inspire all the areas of our life. And this is the third level of the decolonization philosophical process, is to produce concepts that will help African people to fight against poverty, to fight against violence, and to fight against ignorance. Fighting poverty, violence, and ignorance is the work of an intellectual, an activist, a true Pan-Africanist militant. In every situation, we have to think twice and to ask ourselves if we have worked on the concept that is guiding our lives. Let me give an example of this method. And that example will be taken in my last book. I will just take that example in my last book. I've just published this book, and it will be translated soon in English and in many African languages. Imperial terrorism, which is the contemporary form of the Western and Middle East aggression against Africa, with irrefutable proofs of the aggression of the NATO against Africa. In this book, I have been shaping a new concept in two words: imperialism and terrorism. Imperial terrorism. What is it? It is a concept which is more thankful than the concept of jihadism. The concept of jihadism has been invented to cheat about reality. It is a fake concept, which means that Africa is attacked on religious basis, on religious goals by some fanatic Muslims who would like all Africans to be under the subjugation of their understanding of the Islamic religion. This fake conception of terrorism in Africa today has been developed by the NATO, by the European Union, on all mainstream Western medias. And it was done to hide the true organization of terror in Africa. So, as a philosopher, like an African Pan-Africanist and activist, like an African intellectual, I observed the situation and I understood that Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State are not fighting for religion. They are not forcing Muslims to become Muslims. What are they exactly doing? They have been created by Western intelligence services, CIA, the Mossad, and many European intelligence services are, in fact, the creators of those terrorist organizations. We have multiple proofs about the creation of Al-Qaeda in the 80s to fight against Soviet troops in Afghanistan. And we have many proofs today of the financing, arming, and helping given by main Western services like the CIA, like the USAID, and so on, to those terrorist organizations. Just follow the declassified documents of these years. Just follow the WikiLeaks scandal investigation. Just have a look on the last Trump administration's revelations about the open involvement of the most powerful Western nations in destabilizing Iraq, Syria, Libya, and finally all the Sahel and Africa through Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State, which are organizations financed by Western services. So when I created the concept of imperial terrorism, it was to put an end to the use of the concept of jihadism. Jihadism is a veil of ignorance invented by Western service to impeach the African intelligence to understand the reality of destabilization. But by thinking that we have, in fact, imperial terrorists, imperial terrorism confronting us, we are now able to name and to identify the enemy and to fight against him. You can't fight terrorism with the help of NATO's forces who have financed, invented, and who are arming those groups, giving them the best contemporary weapons. You cannot in Africa fight against terrorism by asking the help of those powers who supported terrorism, introduced terrorism, notably through the destruction of Libya, to impeach African people, to put an end to the dollar, euro, franc CFA currencies domination on our people. So through this book, I invented a concept to put an end to a confusion. And I think this is the goal of all the process of decolonization of African philosophy, African thought today. We have to build people able to create concepts and to confront life and affirm our own values of justice, of truth, and solidarity in all circumstances. This is for me an example of the way of decolonizing the minds by making in all African people, in all African individual, a potential creator rooted in his own tradition. Because there is no universality without unicity, without originality. We are entering in the multipolar world where Africa will just have to affirm its own civilizational personality, its own values, and to produce its own prosperity through those values. There is no universalism which will be applied to all the people of the world. Universality is a quest of particular people, particular individual, particular civilization. There is no perfect civilization in the world. We just have to respect one between, we just have to have respect among ourselves, among our civilization, so we will have a peaceful earth. But this is not given. This is obtained by fight, by struggle, and by knowledge. Thank you very much. I wish you good works in Berlin, and I hope I told you my thoughts in my best possible English. Thank you. Have a good work in Berlin. I am Professor Franklin Nyamsi, Wa Cameroon, Wa Africa, President of the African Freedom Institute based in Bamako, Mali. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I am Lydia Thorpe. I'm a Gunai Gunich Maran Japarang woman, first and foremost. but I'm also a senator in the colonial government of what is now called Australia, or what they call Australia. I want to thank the Secretariat for the invitation to speak to you today. This is an incredible event and something that we need to replicate around the world to garner international solidarity and support to continue the resistance against the colonies right around the world, but also to stand up against the many injustices First Peoples around the globe continue to face. I come from a strong line of matriarchs who have fought the colony all of their lives, and I know no different. I've been raised to be strong, to be outspoken, and to resist the colony in all its forms. So, you know, we face in this country every day a most sophisticated genocide where they're not coming with an army and guns. They're doing it silently. They're doing it in a way where they take 24,000 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children from their families and give them to other people, predominantly white people. That is an act of genocide. They continue to cause harm against our people on every level. That is an act of genocide. They rape and pillage our country, our water, our song lines. That is an act of genocide. They continue to incarcerate our people and kill our people in custody, and those numbers are on the rise. That is an act of genocide. So the sophistication of the genocide in what they call Australia is very real, and our people are fighting, continue to fight and resist after over 200 years of colonization. We are very strong people, very proud people, and we will continue to take on the colony and march in the streets and call out the king for being the colonizer that he is, and the person who should be held accountable for receiving stolen goods. I mean, you know, in any other court in any country, if you are caught stealing, then you get into trouble by the law. Now we have a colonizing king who stole so much, who gets to sit in his throne and look down on people like us. So we have an obligation to our old people to resist the colony in all its forms and to seek reparations so that we do not suffer the consequences of genocide or colonization in the way that we have. We need to self-determine our own destinies. It is us who knows what is best for us. We need to look at peace treaties. You know, we want a peace treaty in this country, sovereign to sovereign. If the colonizing king says he's sovereign of our lands, well, let's talk about that, because we've never ceded our sovereignty and we will never cede our sovereignty. So a treaty has to be between sovereigns, and it could potentially be about sharing sovereignty. But until we have that conversation and that negotiation, there is an ongoing
Hi, everyone. Hi, every ladies and gentlemen.